Hi everyone, welcome to the week 2 video. This week we're going to be talking about your rough draft and your peer feedback assignment. We're going to look at the readings for a little bit and establish connections. And then I have 2 writing activities for you that talk about and ask you to think critically about audience impact and how your language is directly impacted by the audience you're speaking to. Just in the last video, we have a writing warm-up. Feel free to pause the video here, take 5 minutes to write on this, and then you can continue. The prompt for this time is write about a time you had a miscommunication with someone. Who was it? You could be vague or specific. How did you handle the situation, and how did your own language help or hinder it? So, like I said, we're going to be talking about your rough draft and your peer feedback, still with Project 1. As we already introduced a language autoethnography essay, the prompt asks you to identify 2 concrete uses or practices of your everyday language and to analyze those uses or practices as contextualized rhetorical situations. In the last video, I sort of just prompted you to start thinking about this project, to start brainstorming it. In this one, we're going to break down the essay a little further, talk about what it looks like, how you should set it up, and what each of the sections should look like as well. So, your rough draft goals. You're going to have this essay that explores and reflects on 2 of your own language uses as rhetorical situations through examples. You're going to want to be as close to completed as possible. Remember, there's a minimum 700 word count for this essay. If there's a section that you're looking for specific feedback on, make a note of it for your peers. So for example, if there's a section that's not quite finished, maybe you're not sure which direction you should take it. If you're like, I could take this 2 directions. There are 2 paths before me. I don't know which one to take. You could put in parentheses in your Word document. This is my thoughts. I would be open to feedback on which direction I should go. And that's how you can kind of make up for not having that completed draft yet if you're waiting to get feedback on something. Remember, you're going to want to be as concrete and specific as possible. Use specific words and phrases as examples. What should the general structure of the paper look like? This page is an example of the outline that you can take for your essay. Your essay doesn't have to look exactly like this. These questions here are mostly just examples there to get you started thinking. You can always do more than what is on this page, but this should be your minimum. Your introduction. Discuss your own understanding of language before taking this class, writing this essay. How did you feel language shaped your identity, or it didn't shape your identity? Then you're going to have another section. This is going to be your first language use or practice. What language are you using? How are you using this language? Why are you using this language? You will learn in this class that I ask you to do this quite frequently, this what, how, and the why. If you are answering these questions, not only in this project, but in all the projects down the road, you're going to be meeting all of the prompt requirements. So keep that in mind. What, how, and why. What language, how are you using it? Why are you using it? That is going to get you talking about the specific language itself, the way that you use it, what words are you using, what phrases are you using? Why are you using this language? Are you at work? Are you at school? Are you talking to your parents? Are you talking to your friends? So that was also going to introduce audience there. What, how, and why are super important to answer. And as long as you're answering them, you're going to be able to make that paragraph count. And you're also going to make sure that you're getting in the reflection part. It's super easy to give your examples, but to not reflect on them. Answering these questions guarantees that you do that reflection. The next section after that is your second language use or practice. Again, answer those what, how, why questions. And then you're going to have a conclusion. How has your perception of your own language use changed? And how do you see it, being your language, intersecting with your identity? Essentially, your conclusion should not just be restating your introduction. It is often taught that conclusions are just a restatement of the introduction or of the thesis. This essay doesn't necessarily have a thesis. It has a topic, but not necessarily a thesis. So instead of like restating your introduction, because that's boring, we already know what we read in your introduction. We already know what you're talking about. You're talking about language. Your conclusion should be an opportunity to show your growth. What have you learned? What are you reflecting on? What is new by the time we come to the end of this essay? What has changed? Not only in your language use, but also in your understanding of it. This will be our first assignment in which we engage with peer feedback. You're going to be submitting your rough draft through Feedback Fruits, and you will also use this platform to give peer feedback. I have a screenshot of where it is on your discussion forum. This is in your week 2 folder at the very bottom. It looks just like this. It's going to have the little, not only in this folder, but in future ones as well, it will have the little purple icon with the 2 people on it. That's how you know it's Feedback Fruits. You'll click that link there, and it'll take you to the platform where you'll be able to upload your draft. A note, I unfortunately cannot access Feedback Fruits from a student perspective to show y'all what it will look like from my screen. However, I was able to find Feedback Fruits did a video doing a little walkthrough. It is in your week 2 folders now, and it's right above where you'll be submitting your rough draft. So feel free to watch that and walk through it with the person that's talking, and maybe it'll help you be a little have a little more understanding as you approach this. That said, just like all of your discussion forums, this one is a little different since you're not posting it in Blackboard, but it's the same kind of setup. You have specific questions you need to be answering, specific objectives that need to be met. You're going to submit your Word document as a docx file or a doc file. And then you're going to be assigned randomly to 2 of your classmates. You'll be able to go into this forum, and you have to, you will be giving them 6 comments in total, split between 2, so 3 and 3. You're going to do 2 marginal and 1 summative comment, and these, the little blurb here gives you some example questions that you can be addressing. Does this draft discuss 2 specific language practices? Do you see them happening here? Do they discuss how the writer navigates these language practices in different episodes, time, place with certain people? Does the draft use specific details, including personal experience, to explore this? Does it show some analysis? It doesn't just describe, but rather reflects on the experiences. So keep those questions in the back of your mind as you're reading through the draft. But I know that many of you may not have experience with giving peer feedback. Peer feedback is something that is very much so ingrained into English classes, but it doesn't happen quite as frequently in your regular literature classes and happens more in your writing classes. If you haven't taken a lot of writing classes, you may have little to no experience giving peer feedback. So let's talk about what it looks like and how you can make sure that you're giving good, helpful feedback. You're going to want to use the describe, evaluate, suggest method to leave 2 marginal comments and 1 summative comment. Like I said, you're going to be giving feedback to 2 of your peers, meaning you're going to make a total of 6 comments, 3 and 3. There is a video on your week 2 folder that is talking specifically about this method. You'll want to watch that video and review it. This is just an overview, just a very glancing brief look at it. Make sure you watch that video. But in general, what you're going to do is describe, what are you seeing? What do you notice? It is just as it says, describe what is happening. What are you talking about? Evaluate. Is what you're noticing, is what you've described working? i.e., is it meeting the prompt's requirements? Is it clear and specific? Or do you notice like a particular sentence and needing more clarity? Those questions are just example ones about like the clarity. You have to look for more than just clarity when it comes to these sentences. Is the writing accurate? Is it fair? And then suggestion. How might the writer improve their writing so that it meets the prompt more closely? Always be helpful in feedback. Unnecessarily rude or cruel criticism will not be tolerated. We're not doing that. You should always be asking yourself, would I want this feedback? Would this feedback be useful to me? If the answer is no, then you need to get rid of that and try again. I will also make an asterisk here. This is a writing class, but it is not a grammar and spelling class. Do not comment on your peers' grammar or spelling, especially in the language autoethnography essay. Later on down the road, you may, for example, with the summary and synthesis and the rhetorical analysis, if you notice one of your peers has spelled like an author's name wrong, then you can gently say like, hey, this is actually spelled this way. That's fine. Otherwise, you should not be worrying about grammar or spelling. Leave that to me. I will be the one that does that feedback if it's necessary. But in general, you will not be graded on grammar or spelling. The only time grammar or spelling is going to be a concern is if there is something that is hindering the comprehension of the text. Okay. So I've been using this terminology of marginal comment and summative comment, but again, with the understanding that perhaps maybe a few of you do not have familiar experience with that, or you haven't heard it referred to in this way. This is just a quick overview to point out marginal comments look like this. You will highlight the text, and then a little comment box will pop up over here, and you'll type a marginal comment. Marginal comments are very brief. They talk about one specific aspect of something that has happened in the paper. That's why they're highlighted. And they're called marginal comments because they appear in the margins, but also in workshops, for example, creative writing workshops. Whenever writers print out their papers, we would hand write notes in the margins. So this is why it's called marginal comments. These are going to be really important for just hitting like important things that you see happening, but they're going to be the smaller things. Your summative comment, first, you'll be giving 2 of these, remember. So you're going to want you're going to want to do 2 marginal comments. Then you have your summative comment. So your summative comment normally would be right here. It would be written out on this part right here, and it is going to be more of like a paragraph in length. It's a bit longer because the summative comment details the whole essay, not just a section of it. It details the whole essay. It overlooks the whole essay. You will probably, in feedback fruits, you won't be able to write on the bottom of the essay. Instead, what I'll ask you to do is highlight the last word or last few words of the text, and then you can give your summative comment in the comment box over here. But just know that it needs to be longer than the marginal ones, and it needs to cover the whole essay. You should always be pointing out what is working well, too. Do not just focus on what you see needs improvement. Comment on the whole essay as a whole, which means you're going to want to hit the highlights. What is working well? What did you enjoy? And then you can go, yeah. So, think of the format as your first paragraph in your summative comment should be, this is working really well. And make sure you list those things. Don't just say like, I really enjoyed this. You're going to want to be specific. I really enjoyed the part where you talked about the story of using your language with X. I enjoyed that you gave us specific words like blank so that we could understand fully your language experience. Next paragraph in there, or indent down, I was wondering if we could see a bit more of this in the second example. I noticed that it is a little less specific than your first one, and I was wondering if you could include more specific language and concrete examples. Again, I am going to repeat it many times, but always be helpful. You never want to be harmful whenever you're approaching this stuff. Before we get there, but it's important in transitioning into the readings. This assignment can be very vulnerable. It can be very hard for people to write this, to be open and honest with their language stories. I am going to ask all of you to recognize your perspective, your experiences with language, and how they may be strikingly different than other people's. Not everyone has a positive experience with language. Some people are ridiculed for their language, and just by the way they talk, they are chastised. So, whenever you're approaching these papers, be kind. Be helpful and be kind. That transitions us into our textbook readings, but also the other 2 PDF readings you have. That's Audre Lorde. Oh my goodness, I'm blanking on her first name, but Lopera, and chapters 1 through 4 in your textbook. I have only hit some highlights. The chapters that you're reading right now are mostly introductory. They're talking about introducing rhetoric to you, introducing an audience, and how our lives are impacted by rhetoric and the subconscious choices that we make every single day that involve rhetoric. But in chapter 1 specifically, it introduces this concept of shared realities and conversations. Our communication, our language, is always interacting with one another. People's lives are incredibly complex, complicated, and intertwined. We share realities. But, as I mentioned previously, not everyone's experience with language is the same way. Not everyone talks the same way, and not everyone reacts to language the same way. Our own experiences shape how we engage and view with the world. So, for example, if you've had a more negative experience with language, you were going to have a more negative perception of the people who received your language poorly. Or you may have a negative perception of your language. I can speak from my own experience, which isn't necessarily language, it's as in words, but my dialect, my accent. I grew up in a small rural town in Texas, and before I came to college, I sort of trained myself out of my accent because I did not want to be seen as less intelligent because I sounded like a redneck. I sounded like a hillbilly. And of course, those 2 terms right there are derogatory. They are used in a derogatory manner. And so I just accidentally fed into that sort of negative perception that I have of people who have heard my accent and my native Texas tongue and have thought less of me, have associated me with the negative caricatures of real people, which we will also talk about that a little later in the class, but that's something to keep in mind. Our communication, the back and forthness of it, our language, the conversations we're having, and the conversations we're not having, the conversations we observe happening, are all going to view and shape our realities. It is how we see the world. It is how we see life. And it directly impacts our lived experiences. And furthermore, it's no act of rhetoric is isolated, it's a response. It changes how we respond to things. You may come to find as you're writing your language autoethnographies that you didn't realize you were adapting or changing your language, and then you write about it and you're like, oh wow, I have been doing that. I have been changing it. I see this thing happening and I have a response where I flip the switch in my brain and I change the way I talk. That brings us into Lord's piece, which is on the transformation of silence. These are 2 quotes I pulled. The transformation of silence into language and action is an act of self-revelation, and that is always fraught with danger. And then that visibility which makes us most vulnerable is that which is also the source of our greatest strength. This assignment is very vulnerable. We are asking you to do something that may seem dangerous. And before you have doubts, think about it. I am asking you within, goodness, what, 14 days of us being together as a class, to write about something that is very personal to you, which is your language, because your language is you. It is who you are. That is dangerous because you never know how people are going to react. Of course, in this classroom, I am making sure that it is an absolutely safe space. I will allow nothing less than that, but that doesn't get rid of your anxiety. I'm hoping that helps ease it, but I know that there is always the worry in the back of the mind. Being that open with someone, especially classmates who right now are still a bit of strangers, can seem worrying. It's hard to be vulnerable. It is, it's scary. But if you trust in me, and you trust in your classmates, and you trust in yourself to kind of take this step towards self-revelation and realization of your own language, you're going to find your voice. You're going to find your strength in your writing. You're going to find your voice and your own language, and you'll be able to take that with you into your academic writing, into this class, as well as beyond that, and you're going to find strength from that. So I know that we're asking a lot of you to be vulnerable like this. I hope that you will trust all of us here, but yourself most of all, to do this, because you absolutely can, and you are all going to succeed wonderfully at this. So now I have some writing activities. Again, I'm not really going to detail these. These are ones where you can just pause the video and take some time for yourself. The first one is, like I said, they're all about audience, but this one has very specific audiences to keep in mind. So the first one for this prompt, I want you to 5 minutes, write as if you were writing to a fellow classmate. Your goal is to just write something that you would let a classmate read. This can be anything: a letter, a story, a poem, a text message, brainstorming. Don't worry about what you write, but to who. So keep that in mind as you're writing this. Okay, I would give this to a classmate. I would be comfortable with letting a classmate read this. So after you do this one, then I want you to do this one. So again, 5 minutes, writing for a best friend. Again, write something that you would let a best friend read. Once again, it can be anything. It's not important about what you're writing, but to who. You're sitting down, you're writing, okay, I would let my best friend read this. This is stuff that I feel comfortable letting a best friend read. And then the last one, which you may find a little complicated, and it is going to be a push for vulnerability, but keep in mind, you do not have to turn these in. No one is going to see these except for yourself. I want you to write something for yourself. Write something that you would let no one else read. Something that is just for you, something that is just your truth, that is your story to share with yourself. If you need to, you can burn it afterwards, you can destroy it, but write something for yourself. Take 5 minutes and write yourself something, anything, a letter, a story, a poem, a text message, brainstorming, just for you. If no one else in the world got to read this, and they don't, what would you write? So after you complete these exercises, I want you to put the 3 documents side by side. Look at the language use in each one. How does your voice change depending on who you're talking to? Are you more formal with your classmates and less formal with your friends? Are you more open and vulnerable with yourself than you are with your classmates? Look at the word choices that you're making. Look at your diction. Is any of it elevated? Is any of it relaxed? These are the things to consider. You can kind of silently reflect on these. And again, you do not have to submit this for me. This is for you to work on, for you to have something to reflect on. You might be surprised with what you find. And I will say, if you do want to share these, you're more than welcome to email me and we can talk about it over that. But for the most part, this is just for you. Then I have one last activity for you this week. It's called As the Author. This one is really important for your peer feedback. I want you to start looking at your brainstorming, at the paragraphs that you're putting together for your language autoethnography, and as you're reading these texts, what questions come up in your mind? What questions do you have for your imagined audience or reader? Example, is blank effective at communicating my language practice of blank? You don't want to use evaluative language. So that is to say, you don't want to be like asking your reader, is this good? Is this bad? Do you think I did this right? Those questions aren't helpful. They're not constructive. And evaluative language isn't, it just isn't something you should be wasting your time on, because there isn't a good or bad or right or wrong. You are doing your best you can, and you're telling your language story, trying to meet specific prompts. If you feel that you have addressed the prompts to the best of your ability, then you already are doing right. So try to avoid that language. I know it can be hard. It's a habit that you have to break. But try to move away from it, and instead of saying good, bad, right, or wrong, try using effective or ineffective. You just want to be reflective on your work as a writer so that you can explore places of expansion or revision, and try to come up with 2 to 3 questions. Then, once you come up with those questions, answer them. If you are asking your audience, is this effective at communicating my language practice? Maybe the answer is that it's not. You have some doubts about if you've detailed it enough. Go back in and add a little bit more detail, and then reread the paragraph. Is it more effective now? Okay, so for this week, reminders. For Monday, 6/5, you should be responding to at least 2 of your classmates on the Brainstorming Language Autoethnography discussion forum. That's going to be in the week 1 folder. In week 2 folder, you're going to have the initial post with your experiences with peer feedback. This is going to be prior to this class. What are your experiences with peer feedback prior to this class? Wednesday, 6/7, that's when you're going to be posting your complete rough draft for peer feedback. Note, you do not have to include your statement of goals and choices in this rough draft. I would prefer it if you did, just that way it's already there and it's ready to go. But it is not required to meet that prompt requirement. After that, you're going to want to respond to at least 2 classmates and the experiences with peer feedback. Friday, 6/9, respond to 2 classmates' rough drafts. It's going to be the same link as submission. And then use that describe, evaluate, suggest model. Okay. Remember, all of these are 11:59 p.m. deadlines. If you have any questions, use the Q&A forum or feel free to email me. Take care, and I'll see you next time.